live stream. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Rabbi Feinstein. I'm sorry we're 13 minutes late. The Jewish people waited 3,800 years to get the Torah, and we had to wait a few more minutes. I apologize for this. We had some technical difficulties, but once again, I'm delighted to have you all here. This is Lunch and Learn, Valley Beth Shalom. We're going to be meeting on Wednesday afternoons at 12:30 for the duration on Zoom until the Lord God allows us and the governor allows us to gather once again in the synagogue. So I'm really glad you're here. You're welcome to join us on Zoom. You're welcome to join us on Facebook, on YouTube Live. All of you are welcome. We're really, really delighted to have you here. And those who are calling me and yelling at me, tell them that we are good. People are calling me. We are on now, I will tell her. So I apologize for the delay. We are going to be looking at the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms is the most emotional book of the Bible. It is a guided tour through the repertoire of human emotions, from the lowest to the very highest. It is not a philosophical book in the sense that it sets out a discursive philosophy or theology. It is, in fact, a book of responses to life. It is a book deeply rooted in the experiences of life that all of us share: life and death, despair and hope, happiness and sadness, a sense of abandonment and a sense of being protected and being cared for. It's used principally in liturgy. It was begun as a devotional book. These are probably the words sung by the Levites in the ancient temple of Jerusalem, and then continued through the ages of the Jewish people as a core text to reflect our responses to living with a God in the universe. There's 150 Psalms. Each Psalm, Psalms, is a chapter of this book.
No, I'm on, but I wanted to make sure that you knew.
We can hear you. Let me turn that off. Let me mute everybody. Mute all. There we go. Okay, there we go. And sorry. And it is a chance for us to feel some of the responses that our ancestors felt. But I want to offer this book in a different way than I usually teach books of the Bible. I'm interested in ideas and in theologies. And usually when we approach a book of the Bible, we're looking for the theology. We're looking for the ideas that are at the core, its vision of the universe, its understanding of the human being, its understanding of life and death and of good and evil. And we'll certainly look at that in the book of Psalms. But what I'd like to do instead is to offer this as this kind of, not just that, not just an academic exercise in the study of ancient Judaism, but more than that, I'd like to offer this as a way of responding. So I'm going to ask you to do something kind of strange. I'm going to ask you to be prepared to do a little bit of responding. You can either do this in a journal, if you happen to have a couple of spare pieces of paper or a place on your computer screen that you can spare, or you can spend some time writing your own Psalms, writing your own responses to the experiences that these texts are raising, as well your responses to the Psalms that we're looking at. So just an interesting sort of an introduction to this. There's a 13th century Kabbalist by name Rav Azriel of Gerona in Spain, who posited the idea that the great sin of Adam in the Garden of Eden wasn't so much eating from the fruit of the tree. The great sin was that there were two trees in the garden. One was the tree of life and one was the tree of knowledge. And what Adam did was separate them. And in separating knowledge from life, he banished wisdom from the world. Wisdom, after all, is what we call life knowledge. It's the knowledge that we draw out of our experiences. It's the knowledge that we draw out of our successes, but even more of our failures. It's the knowledge that we draw out of our tragedies and our celebrations. And what we're going to find in the book of Psalms is wisdom. Not just knowledge, not just ideas, not just ideology or philosophy, but really a sense of how life ought to be lived. And I think it's a really wonderful exercise that while we're studying this book together, while we'll take the journey through the book of Psalms, it would be really worthwhile to sort of put your own wisdom together. I've often recommended to members of the congregation, and those of you who've been sitting at VBS for some years have heard this sermon many times, and I published it many times, that this is a great time of year to write a letter to the people you love. If you happen to be blessed with a partner, with a spouse, with children, with grandchildren, perhaps, if you have friends in the world who matter to you, then writing a letter to them and put in this letter what life has taught you. What did you learn from growing up in the home you grew up in? What did you learn from the schools you attended? What have you learned from the work you've done in the world, from your successes and even more from your failures? What have you learned from your relationships? If you've been married or divorced, or if you've had close friendships, close loves, what have you learned from those relationships? If those of you have been blessed with children, what have you learned from that experience? Those of you who have, and all of us in some time have met tragedy, have buried loved ones or said goodbye to dear friends, to people who were mentors, people who meant the world to us. What have we learned from those experiences? What has life taught you? What is the meaning of your life, the Torah of your life? And I've said this to people for a long time, and some people actually started doing it, and I'm really kind of pleased because I think it is a marvelous religious exercise. Do this for three reasons. Do this for three reasons. Number one, because you deserve to know. Because I think that deep down people have wisdom within them. They have life wisdom, life knowledge, things that they've wrestled out of life. And I think that the opportunity to learn that life wisdom is truly, genuinely, and remarkably significant. The basically the lesson is there are 4,800 and something verses in a Sefer Torah, more than 300,000 handwritten letters. And according to the tradition, if any one of those letters is missing, even the smallest yud, the entire Sefer Torah, a scroll of the Torah, is puzzle. You can't use it. You put it away in the ark until it can be repaired. Now, that is a great example of Jewish obsessive compulsive disease. But really, if you think about what it means, there's a symbolic meaning to that. Every one of us is a letter in God's Torah. Every one of us is sent into the world to bring one word, one phrase, one sentence, one segment of the divine message to the world. The question is, how many of us actually understand that message? How many of us have ever discovered what the message was? How many of us have ever taken the time to really gather in the meaning, the Torah of our lives? Our ancestors had time. Now, they didn't have Facebook. They didn't have computers. They didn't have cable television. They didn't have all of the conveniences of modern life. And life was much harder for our ancestors. But they did have one thing that we don't have. They had the opportunity to contemplate and the permission to contemplate. Today, if you're contemplating, someone comes and says, stop daydreaming. Today, if you're contemplating, people say that you're being unproductive. Today, if you're contemplating, there's a sense that you're missing out on something. But in our ancestors' time, contemplation was something that was highly valued. That is time taken to reflect, to meditate, to think about, to ask yourself, what have I gained? What have I learned from the days I've spent in this world? And I think that's a very valuable exercise. And coming Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, this is really the best time to do that. So the first reason to do it is because you deserve to know. The second reason to do this is so that your friends, your family, the people who love you, they deserve to know too. I've been doing this exercise for many, many years. And what I've unfortunately, but fortunately had the opportunity is that people have died and their kids came to me and grandkids came and said, you know, that thing you made my father, my mother do, she did it. And we have here the words. Now imagine that for a moment. What a gift to those who come after you. I mean, yeah, you leave them the Buick and you leave them some nice silverware and maybe a few dollars here or there. But what would be more valuable than leaving them your reflections of the meaning of life, your Torah, your wisdom, your understanding of how life ought to be lived? What a gift. What a beautiful gift. They call this an ethical will, but it's a beautiful gift to those who come after you. And the third reason, and to me too, by the way, because I have to organize your funeral service, and otherwise I'm just going to talk about your eccentricities and idiosyncrasies. And by the way, that's what's happened, because I always ask family members to speak about their loved ones. And sometimes they have really deep and powerful and beautiful things to say, but you'd be surprised how often those exercises turn into, well, here are the goofy, weird, and strange things that mom or dad used to do. And that's fun and that's sweet. And that's, it captures, perhaps it captures the individuality of the person. But I always worry about we're missing the truth, the deepest reflections of this soul about life. So please write this down and share it someplace. Put it someplace we can find it. And the third reason is because you'll understand not just the book of Psalms, but you'll understand all of our religious texts. I mean, I truly believe that God wrote the Torah, but God doesn't own a word processor or even a pencil. The instrument that the Lord God uses to bring truth into the world is the sensitive souls of people who are paying attention to life. We are the instruments of God's message. And if you want to understand what the Torah is, what the Bible is, what the Talmud, what the Siddur, what the Machzor, what the Megillah, if you want to understand our sacred texts, you've got to understand this exercise, because what those texts really are the collected letters of our ancestors. They lived, they worked, they celebrated, they suffered, they cried, they laughed. And before they died, they wrote down what it takes to live a life that matters. And they sent that as a love letter to us, as a gift, as an eternal gift to their great, 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 great grandchildren. The only difficulty we have is that often those letters are written in an idiom that's inaccessible to us, in languages we don't read, in images and metaphors that we don't quite understand. And that's why we have to do this together. And we have to be open to hear their words and respond to them. So I'm going to ask you to begin writing your own book of Psalms as we begin this exercise of reading the Psalms, the letters of our ancestors. And I hope that you'll enjoy that. In future sessions, I'll go through some of the technical stuff. I have to make a confession, actually. So when I was at seminary, which is now 40 years ago, the Bible classes that I took were highly technical. What we did was look at how the Bible was put together and the ancient Near Eastern roots of all the words. And I found that intensely frustrating. I was a 20-something-year-old. I was filled with religious and political and moral zeal. I was looking for what the Bible could say to me, and my professors were abjectly uninterested in that question. They wanted to know how many Ugaritic and Akkadian ancient Near Eastern verbs were in this book. And I wanted to know what this guy was trying to say to my soul. So I gave up on Bible a long time ago. And it's only in my adulthood that I've come back to it. And I find now that it's filled with stuff that's really very valuable. So I'll do the technical stuff at a later session, but I want to begin where I would have wanted to begin long ago when I was young and silly, which is, what does this book try to say to us? So let's begin. Let's begin with the very first Psalm. Here's an introduction, a short intro. Can everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see the text. Good. James Kugel was a professor of Bible, a professor of Jewish studies at Harvard, and he recently made Aliyah to Israel. He lives in Israel now and teaches at Bar Ilan University. Unfortunately, he's very ill, but he's survived so far and written some beautiful books. Here is a religious Jew writing about the Bible, and he has a beautiful rendition of how we might approach this text. Just quickly, he says, it is most natural for us to explain the difference between our view of things and those of the earlier civilizations by saying that in pre-modern times, people simply didn't know the facts, or they were under a misapprehension that we've freed ourselves from. They didn't know science back then. They didn't know where disease comes from. They didn't know how economics works. They didn't know where weather came from the way we do. No doubt he says there's truth in this proposition, but it seems we ought to at least be prepared to entertain the opposite hypothesis, that however much progress the intervening centuries may have brought in some domains, they have also led us to lose a way of seeing that existed in former times. And by way of seeing, I mean to suggest something more than simply another point of view. Perhaps people were actually enabled by this way of seeing to observe things that we no longer observe nowadays. In other words, our ancestors had perceptive abilities which we've lost because of the march of civilization. We've gained so much from modernity. Science has completely revolutionized our lives. But the busyness of life, as I suggested before, has forced us away from certain kinds of reflections. It is difficult for one who reads the Bible carefully and takes its words seriously not to arrive at such a conclusion. Something, a certain way of perceiving, has gradually closed inside of us, so that nowadays most people simply do not register or do not have access to what was visible in an earlier age. Now, I want to make something very clear. If you're sick, you go to a doctor because I think biblical medicine will probably kill you, right? I mean, for biochemistry, you can't beat modern medicine. It's no question. No, but when we come to moral questions, when we come to questions of the value and worth of human beings, when we even come to some political kinds of questions about how a society might be organized and what are the deepest values, is it in fact possible that our ancestors saw things and understood things and held convictions that we've given up and that could be terribly valuable to us in the course of life? He ends by saying, what we have, we all have, are those texts of the Bible that bear witness to that other way of seeing, and perhaps invite us, with the sum of some great spiritual imagination, to try to enter into it, open our eyes, and look. Can we look at life through the eyes that our ancestors looked at life and regain an ancient way of seeing, which is terribly valuable and deeply missed in the course of our lives? And that's going to be the sort of way that I'm going to ask you to approach this. We'll certainly bring some critical tools to this, some modern scientific ways of reading this, but I want to suggest that there are ways of reading that simply open us up. And that's what we're going to find here. So let's begin. Psalm 1. Of course, there's an introduction before I begin. Every rabbi has to say something before he begins. So before I begin, let me just offer this one simple observation. The way biblical books begin is very important. The way the book begins, you know that it is a custom in the Bible that the name of the book, and the Torah particularly, the name of the book comes from the first significant word in the first line of the book. So the first book of the Bible begins with the word Breshit. That's the name of the book. It's called Breshit. Shmot is the first significant word in the second book of the Bible. So here, Sefer Tehillim shouldn't be called Sefer Tehillim. Tehillim means psalms, means prayers, psalms of praise, words of praise. The first word of this book is Ashrei. Ashrei means happy. The word Osher in Hebrew means wealth or fulfillment or satisfaction. Ashrei Ha'ish, happy is the man who. That's how the book begins. So if you're really going to name this book properly, this should be the book of happiness, or the book of fulfillment, or the pathway toward fulfillment. This is the book of the way of life that leads to something worthwhile, to a life that is significant and a life that is worthwhile. That really ought to be the beginning, the name of the book. This is a book that sets out a remarkable ambition and aspiration. I'm going to show you how to live your life. I'm going to show you how to live your life so that on your last day in the world, you'll say it's worth it. I'll show you that one in a minute. I'm going to start with this. So I gave you both the Hebrew and the English. I'm going to refer to the Hebrew, and I'm going to scold you many times for not learning Hebrew if you don't know Hebrew, because you really can't enter into the rhythm of the language without really knowing some Hebrew. But if you don't read Hebrew, don't worry. We're going to have the English right in front of us. It begins with this phrase, Ashrei Ha'ish, happy is the man Asher, who. So now, here's my first question for your Psalms. If you had to write a letter to your great-grandchildren, and you had to answer the question, what is the way to happiness? What would you say? What's the way to happiness? What contributes to a life that's happy? And what detracts from a life that's happy? And frankly, don't even think about your great-grandchildren. That's too abstract, except for people like Louise who are blessed with great-grandchildren. Think about writing to yourself when you were 13. I think that's one of the most interesting questions, like, what did I wish I knew? Suppose you were writing a letter to your the 13-year-old you, and you could put in that letter, hi, I'm here living some years, generations, decades after you. And having gone down the path of life, this is what I wish I would have known. This is what I want you to know. Ashrei Ha'ish, happy is the person who. What is the way to happiness? What is the way to happiness? That's the way the book begins. And that's the ambition and aspiration of the book. I'm going to show you the way to happiness. And to complete the sermon, look at all the ways that people behave in the world that yield terrible unhappiness. And I wonder why. Why do they do that? Why do we do this? Why not live the life that you'd prefer to live? That's an interesting question to me. There's a whole bunch of stories in the Jewish folklore about people who go out to find treasures and come back with nothing. There's one that I cherish very much about a guy who goes out to find diamonds and comes home with potatoes. Why is it that someone goes out to find treasure in life and comes home with empty pockets? And how many of us have had that experience? And the only thing that we gain is Ashrei Ha'ish, the wisdom that maybe I missed the path, I missed the turnoff, I took the wrong path. Ashrei Ha'ish asher lo alach be'etzat rishayim b'derech chatem lo amad. Happy is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor taken the path of the sinner, nor joined the company of the insolent or the casual or the mocking. Now, what a strange way to start the book. Yeah, if I were writing the book, I would start out with an affirmative statement. Happy is the person who worships God. I suppose if you're religious, happy is the person, happy is Bill Gates, who has all the money in the world and can do what he wants. Happy is, but look what the Bible does. It begins by starting with not. Isn't that a strange way to begin a book? Here's here's the way not to go. Here's the dead end. Now, why do you suppose it begins with the dead end? Because so many people get stuck in the dead end? Because so many people find their way into that dead end, because that dead end is so alluring? Is that what it is? Is he responding, is the psalmist here responding to a world where he sees people wandering into that dead end and then getting stuck, the sort of cul-de-sac of life? You thought it was going to go to someplace and you didn't see the sign that said not a through street or no outlet. And there you sit. You ever make that turn and find yourself on a cul-de-sac and feel really stupid that you have to turn around, and you pull into somebody's driveway and you know they're sitting in their living room going, another idiot, right? Is that why he begins this way? Is he begins this way with a negative instead of a positive? What a strange way to begin. But there's something of a protest here. Don't go that way. Don't go that. And I know it's easy to go that way. Don't go that way. That's not the way to go. Happy is happy is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, taken the path of sinner, or joined the company. The word is leitzim. Leitzim. Now, leitzim are insolent. It could also be those who are casual, those who don't pay, those are not mindful. Senselessness. Those are not mindful. So what we have here are three statements, and they're all parallel to each other. You see how that works? When the Bible wants you to pay attention, it doubles up on a statement. When it really wants you to pay attention, it's a triple. Don't follow the counsel of the wicked. Don't walk the path of sinners, and don't join those who aren't mindful, who are senseless, who are casual, who don't take life with any seriousness. And now he turns from the negative to the positive. Rather, the teaching, now here, the word in Hebrew is ki'im Torat Adonai, the Torah of God. Now, the word Torah we use with a capital T, and it means the Torah, but its real meaning is with a small t is teaching, or rather truth. He craves the truth of God. He craves God's truth, and he studies that truth, or he ruminates on that truth, or he meditates on that truth day and night. He is like a tree planted beside streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose foliage never fades, and whatever it produces thrives. You got to remember something, that geography is destiny. And Eretz Yisrael, much like like California, has no river. Egypt has a river. Mesopotamia has two rivers. China has rivers. America has rivers. All the great civilizations of the world have rivers except the one we live in. We're watered by rain. And occasionally the rain gathers up. You get enough snowfall on the Hermon that the Jordan River flows through the course of the summer. Occasionally there's enough rain that the aquifers fill up. So the idea of a tree, in drought, a tree dies, or at least withers, and its leaves become brown and stiff and rigid, and there's no life in it. but the image of a tree planted beside water that's always drawing nourishment from a deep underground stream and that yields fruit. That's his metaphor, or rather his simile here. It's because he's like, it's a simile for the one who is rooted in God's truth. Now, so what has he told us? That underneath the course of human experience, there flows a river of truth. You have to go find it. It's not immediately apparent. It's an aquifer. It's an underground river. But the person who can find it, the person who has the patience and the persistence and the ability to push off all of the superficial offers of instant karma, of a quick blessing, of a simple way of life, but the person who's really willing to work and root herself and root himself in that underground river of truth, you won't see the river. What you'll see is a person who produces fruit, a person who is fruitful, creative, and powerful. Fruitful, creative, and powerful. So let me take a moment, because this is our first class after the summer and high holidays are coming. Let me take a moment to talk about my teacher. I had a marvelous gift in my life. I spent 25 years sitting next to Harold Schulweis on the Bima Valley Bashalom. Harold died in 2014 at the age of 89. But I will tell you that except for the last few months of his life when he was really uncomfortable, he's the youngest 89-year-old you'll ever meet. The man was filled with possibilities, with projects. He had visions. He had ideas. I could have run 20 synagogues on the ideas that he would spin out over the course of life. At one point we switched jobs because he knew that he didn't want to have to worry about organizing any of this stuff. He just loved to think and come up with brilliant ideas. In his last years, he founded the Jewish World Watch, which was one of his most significant projects. Now you look at this idea of a person who is rooted in an underground stream of truth, of wisdom, of spiritual vision, of energy, of creativity. You can't see the stream, but you can see the fruit. And you say to yourself, where does that person get that kind of energy? Where does that person get that kind of power? Where does that person get that kind of vision? Where does he get it from? Why isn't he tired? And it used to bother me because I was much younger, I was 30 years younger than him, and I was tired all the time. And he would come in with ideas. It was impossible to pray at Valley Beth Shalom because all he wanted to do was talk on Saturday morning. And those of you who know Yossi Dresner, who's the ritual director, would frequently turn to us on the Bima and shh, be quiet. Because Rabbi Schulweis had so much he wanted to share. So this simile of a human soul rooted in a source of truth that yields the fruit of vision, creativity, possibility, the gifts of his life. And now the psalmist turns upside down. So we started with what not to do, and he gave us a vision of what to do. Now the second half of the psalm, right? Lo kain harishaim. So the one we're talking about is the tzaddik, is the man who's rooted in God's world. The opposite of the tzaddik is the rasha, the evil one. And what is his definition of an evil one? It's the one who manufactures his own truth out of his ego. He's not rooted in God's truth. And as opposed to look at the image here, rather they are like the chaff that the wind blows away. So consider the two metaphors, the two similes. The tree rooted by the water, so that constantly producing fruit, and the chaff that has nothing to hold it down and is blown away by time, blown away by the wind, blown away by events, blown away, right? So the wicked will not withstand judgment, nor will sinners stand in the assembly of the righteous. And here the word is mishpat. Mishpat is judgment. I don't think he's talking about, the fantasy that we go to heaven and there's a court. No, I think the mishpat here is just the flow of time. People who are rooted in their own ego, rooted in their own in their own truth and unwilling to find that great source of truth that lies beneath the surface. People who are out to make a name for themselves, to make themselves famous, powerful, popular, there's nothing to them. There's nothing to their lives. There's no substance that's going to give them something to withstand the flow of time. And it's the flow of time that is the ultimate judge of whether a life is worthwhile. And so now he goes from what not to do to what to do, and then again, what not to do and what to do. For the Lord cherishes the way of the righteous. Now, the word is Yodea. Yodea is a beautiful word in Hebrew. It literally means to know something cognitively, it means to know, but it also means intimacy. For the Lord cherishes or knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is lost, is doomed. This is our first psalm. This is our first introduction to the whole book. And what is the substance of this introduction? The substance of the introduction, the substance of the introduction is I'm going to show you a way of life. But that way of life depends upon something that you're going to do. You're going to have to locate that great flow of wisdom that lies beneath the surface. I can point out to you the springs where that comes up to the surface. And that's what I'm going to do in my book, says the psalmist. I will show you where that flow of wisdom enters our world, but you have to go find it. And I'll be your guide to find it, but you're going to have to go and do the work. And the great apposition, the great sort of the A and the B here, the two opposite, the dialectic is you can live your life as a tzaddik, drawing energy from that flow of wisdom that lies beneath the surface of human existence. But that's going to require meditation, reflection. It's going to require a certain way of being in the world. Or you can go on your own and try to find it within the sort of regular routine ways that people find satisfaction. And people are going to find it in wealth, and they're going to find it in pleasure, and they're going to find it in social approval and conformity and popularity and celebrity. And he says, I'm going to tell you that the normal ways that people go about finding worth in this world in the end won't benefit you. This is an alternative path. This is a counterculture. And that's the guide, that's the journey that we're going to take together. Let me stop for a moment. And I have people on Zoom and I have some people on Facebook. And I will try and see if we can find your questions and comments. So let's begin with any of the Zoom people. Anyone have comments, questions, or counter sermons? I'm delighted to answer. You can just raise a hand and I'll unmute you. It's an amazing power, this mute power, you know? I have to tell you, there we are. Hi, everybody. It's every rabbi's dream, you know? Congregants wish they had this. You just mute the rabbi and go back to sleep, right? Questions, counter sermons? Anyone on Facebook have a question or a counter sermon they'd like to ask? All right, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We're going to conclude in just a second. Find a good Bible, okay? Now, the Torah is the Chumash, the red book that we read in synagogue. That's the 5 books of Moses, including the Haftarot, which are the prophetic sections of the Bible that are read on Shabbat. What I'd like you to do instead is to find a Bible. A Bible contains all 3 sections of the Hebrew Scripture, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Writings is where Psalms is. It's the Ketuvim. It's the end of the book, toward the end of the Bible. And Psalms, Tehillim, is the first section of writings. There are a couple of very good translations now. Okay, one of the translations that I recommend, of course, the standard one in the Jewish world is put out by the Jewish Publication Society, JPS. You can get the writings as a separate volume, but you can get the whole Tanakh now, the whole of the Hebrew Scripture in the JPS translation. That's very worthwhile. The other one that I think is very, very worthwhile is a brand new translation that came out, I think, just a year ago, actually, from Robert Alter, who's a professor at Berkeley, who is a wonderful, wonderful translator. And I'll be using both. Professor Alter's translation tries to capture the rhythm and the style of the biblical Hebrew, and he does a much better job than the JPS. The JPS is a very good translation because it uses modern scholarly techniques in order to understand what the Bible is trying to say. They're both really worthwhile, but get one of the two of them, and I'll provide texts week to week so that we can look at them together. And if you happen to have one, a Bible at home, or this next Psalm that I'd like you to read, you can find in the prayer book. I'd like you to take a look at Psalm 92. Psalm 92. If you happen to be if you don't have a Bible at home, you can't get your hands on one, open any prayer book, a Jewish prayer book, and find the prayers for Kabbalat Shabbat, the prayers just before Mariv on Erev Shabbos, on Friday night, the opening prayers of Kabbalat Shabbat. And just the last Psalm of Kabbalat Shabbat is Psalm 92. It starts with the words, Mizmor Shir Liyom Shabbat, a song for the Sabbath day. And that's going to be our text for next week. Okay? I want to thank you for joining. I apologize for the technical problems that we had at the outset of the hour. I'll try to have them corrected. Next week, Wednesday, at 12:30, you can join us here on Zoom, or you can join us on Facebook Live, or you can join us on YouTube. And of course, everything we do at VBS is archived, so you can get it online later if you happen to miss part of a session or you miss a session. One other commercial before we conclude. We're going to be continuing, of course, with Morning Minyan at 7:30 and Evening Minyan at 6 o'clock. On Friday night, Minions at 6 o'clock. We're going to be switching over to 5 o'clock soon. And then Shabbos morning Torah study at 9, davening our morning prayers at 10 o'clock. The high holidays are coming. Tonight, this evening, Wednesday night, the first of a series of sessions that we call Yontif University and Yontif U. Yontif U is to help us get prepared for the holiday, and I'll be teaching tonight, and each of the other rabbis will be teaching tonight, and you're all welcome to enjoy that tonight, and everyone is welcome to share that at 7 o'clock tonight. And once again, everything that we put on VBS Live, you can see together on you can see later on if you want to look up the archive from the VBS website. The high holidays are coming. We would be delighted to have you with us. We're asking everyone to join the synagogue. We will not make it financially prohibitive for anybody. That is, whatever you can afford, we'll take. We just ask people to make a fair contribution to keep the place open. Yes, I would love to offer it for free. Everything for free. Unfortunately, the Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles does not accept prayer in lieu of their bills. So give us a hand, join the shul. Whatever you can afford, we'd be delighted to take with gratitude, really. And we'll send you the links and codes for the high holidays. It's all going to be done on Zoom, as well as a whole host of preparation programs that will be available to people. And we want to make sure that everyone is with us. So thank you for paying attention. Thank you for joining. Anyone here on
Can we make any
Facebook?
comments?
You want to make a comment? Now you want to make a comment?
May I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I have made 65 calls in the last day or so to Valley Beth Shalom members for the caring committee, and at least 30 of them asked me to please thank Rabbi Feinstein for all that he has done and continues to do, and how much they appreciate it.
And the other 30 say that scoundrel should be run out of town. Can you imagine such a son of a gun?
The other 30 just didn't say anything, but I wanted you to know how appreciative all of the senior members that I have spoken to are of what you do.
Well, you're very sweet, Louise. And that was a completely unsolicited commercial by my friend Louise Spitzer, and deeply, deeply appreciated. David, thank you for your comment. We will take that question up as we go through, because you're going to find David presented, David or Stevie N, because it's both of you. Is it David or Stevie N? David. David suggests, that there isn't one path, that there are many paths to wisdom. And that reducing life to one path alone, Ashrei Ha'isha Asher, like Ashrei, the happy is the man who found the way. is unfair. And you're going to find that in the book as well. This is the most democratic book of the Bible, which is to say, there are more voices in this book. I'd like to use the phrase the psalmist. And traditionally, the idea is that King David wrote this book. But the truth is, there's no such thing as the psalmist. 150 psalms represent 150 different visions of what human life ought to be, 150 different ideas of how one finds true life, true truth, how one finds happiness, how one finds fulfillment. Some of them you'll see are very cynical. Some of them are very exalting. Some of them are very sad. Some of them are very happy. And that's one of the real beauties of this book, right? It's a book that's it's more a conversation than a monologue. It's a book that it's more a symphony than simply a melody. But we have to trace the melodies that make up the symphony. And that's what we'll be doing together. I want to wish all of you a very good day. Stay warm, stay well, stay safe, be kind, and we'll see each other. Those who want to join me tonight at 7 o'clock, take a look at the high holidays. And those who want to join next week, 12:30, I apologize for the technical problems. I'm so glad you're with us. Stay well.